Yeah, really quickly, Mr. Trey, I just wanted to shout out the results of the question. Do you think voting is impactful? And I loved all the responses, like we said, but out of the students that did vote, 92% of you, 12 did say, yes, you do think voting is impactful. And one person did say no. So we appreciate everybody participating in this conversation. Just wanted to share those results. All right, I think we can move to the next slide where I get a chance to explain what's about to take place and introduce our guest. All right, so just a reminder, this session is being hosted by the Coffee Talk Internship Series of the fall 2022 semester. Coffee Talk brings together participants and staff in a safe space to discuss civic engagement related topics of interest and or concern to the group. The group meets weekly via Zoom and also in person for team building experience, and we are now happy to have a guest, and we are happy to have various guests through external resources, such as the guest I will soon introduce, to not only connect with us to learn, but also to hear our participants and their voice on the matters that are being discussed. Today, we are joined by Harold Miller, the Executive Director of the Racial Justice Commission. The commission was formed in 2021 and is a charter revision commission tasked with examining structural racism within NYC. The commission has examined the city's charter to identify structural barriers facing Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, Pacific Islander, Middle Eastern, and all people of color in NYC based on community input. Based on this community input, has been put forward ballot questions aimed at eliminating barriers and promoting racial equity. As you prepare to vote on November 8th, Good Shepherd wants you to have information about the proposed changes so you are best informed going into that ballot booth. And with that, I will pass it on to Harold Miller of the commission. Harold, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone, for being on today. It is a pleasure for me to be in your space. I enjoyed the vibes earlier, and the conversation about voting, I thought was like really honest and so true. It is easy to think about voting as something that is an exercise that like others should be doing, and how it doesn't really affect me. But I learned early on in my life that politics is a cruel game. You either play in it or you get played by it. And so I took heed to that advice and got involved early on. And what I realized, a couple of things, before I get into the presentation. One, when you think about it, when Black people were freed in this country, one of the first things they took away, right around Reconstruction, was our access to voting. There's a reason for that. Because voting is power, and because you have the ability to affect change with your vote. And so they knew that early on, that like we didn't want all these people to change our way of life. And so that mindset persists all the way to today. They are doing there are folks out there who are doing everything they can to discourage people from voting. There are folks out there that loves the fact that there's low voter turnout in our city and our country. They love it. You know why? Because they can hold on to power. And, they hold on to power, resources, the money, what gets funded, what doesn't get funded, all those things they want to keep control over. So I don't want to be preachy here, but I just want to put some perspective that I can understand that folks may be, cynical about like when you vote for somebody, they don't do their job. But voting is actually a community exercise, I say. And what that means is that after you vote, you got to organize, and you got to take your power of the vote and actually exercise it and organizing the rest of the year. So not like your participation only is that one day, but it got to be every day, and that's how you actually how you build real power. And that's why you vote, is for power, not just because you like somebody, they look nice, but who can actually affect change that benefits you and your community. And so voting is a community exercise. And so I just want to kind of leave that there. But you'll hear in my presentation that the New York City Racial Justice Commission, as was introduced as a charter revision commission, meaning that the commissioners who I work for put forth ballot measures that New York City voters will have a choice on, which is a unique circumstance, because usually when you're putting laws into place, that's usually only done by your city council or some sort of legislative body. But here, when you actually have ballot measures, the people get to decide what the laws are. And so it's a very unique opportunity to actually make a decision. And it was done on purpose because issues around racial equity have been so pervasive, for so many years. Racial inequity is so in our structures. Having ballot measures to address and to begin to dismantle structural racism does need everyone's input, does need everyone's voice in it. And so that's why there are ballot measures, before the voters in November. So I'm going to share my screen and walk through with you kind of what these ballot questions are. I'll take questions at the end, or you just throw it in the chat. And then, if you feel compelled to ask a question right away, but happy to do so. And so the commission was founded back in March of 2021 by former Mayor Bill de Blasio. In context, this was a time where we're, in the midst of COVID, people of color were dying from COVID at much higher rates than white New Yorkers. You had George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. You had all these deaths, racially motivated deaths going on around the country. And the pressure from protests, the pressure from just people speaking out compelled city leaders to do something. And so one of the things the former mayor did, was to form this commission to actually, how do the city addresses structural racism and begin to dismantle those barriers. And I emphasize the word begin because I don't want to make any illusions that you're going to solve racism with 3 ballot questions in 2 years. It's a part of a larger process and work that's been going on way before us, and hopefully will continue till we get full equity in our city and our country. But this is a part of the work that's happening right now. And so our commissioners got to work. They went out and met with the public. We held dozens and dozens of public input sessions where we heard from New Yorkers across the board. They met with subject experts in various disciplines like, education, housing, childcare, economic development, and listen to their thoughts about what are the barriers that prevent people from living their full potential, their best lives possible. And so after hearing that input, after hearing from the public and doing their own research into the charter, they came up with 3 ballot measures that New Yorkers will be voting on just a week from now. So the first question is adding a statement of values to guide government. So what does that mean? So it means that New York City, if this was to pass, will add what's called a preamble. It's an introductory statement. It's your mission statement. It's the thing that you live by, which you strive to go. So every successful organization has a mission statement. It is very fascinating that this is perhaps the mightiest city in all of human history that existed, but has not been able, has not had a preamble throughout its history. So trying to with the guidance of government, you have a statement of values of a city that we want to live in, a city that that all New Yorkers live with dignity, a city where you have that's just and equitable for all, a city that is, values affordable housing, access to healthcare, clean environment, being able to, have all the things that we need to live with real dignity. And it also acknowledges the past harms that New Yorkers face, whether it be from the indigenous New Yorkers who who land has been taken from them, the Lenape, to the African slave trade, where Black people were brought here against their will and worked here in this country for free. You had immigrants all throughout the generations coming into the city that were marginalized and discriminated against. And so all, acknowledges that, because in order for us to move forward, you have to acknowledge the past harms that racism has caused onto people here in New York City. And so if adapted, we will have this preamble that will be on the books, that everyone knows what kind of city we want it to be, what we strive to be. So that's our aspiration question. The second question is a question about establishing an Office of Racial Equity, creation of racial equity plans, and the development of a commission on racial equity. So right now, the city makes decisions every day, and it doesn't necessarily have to consider race when making those decisions. Decisions about the budget, decisions about what laws, all sorts of decisions doesn't have to focus on, whether or not what's the racial impact. Does this help us moving forward around racial equity? And so if ballot question 2 passes, it actually addresses that. And so it requires city agencies, all city agencies, to provide what's called racial equity plans, where they all will have to take part and develop plans how they can actually address racial inequities and eliminate racial disparities and barriers. They'll do that every 2 years, so you'll be able to see results. Each agency will have to come up with some sort of indicator or some sort of data point to show they're making progress. And the Office of Racial Equity, if passed, will be that office that will work with each of those agencies to make sure that they're doing the work to establish these plans and actually fulfilling what they're planning to do. And that throughout the year, they will work with the city agencies as a whole to create greater access and opportunities for all New Yorkers. And then you have the Commission on Racial Equity, which will be people who made up of communities around the city. Be young people, be elders, or be young couples, or be those who are disabled, those who are LGBTQ+. There'll be those who are of all backgrounds, those who are just as involved, to help guide the work of the city agencies and the Office of Racial Equity in their work. They're an independent body. They'll be appointed by elected officials, but no one will have a dominant level of appointments. And so those that commission will be able to review those plans by the city agencies, and be able to help give guidance about what direction the city needs to go in when it comes to racial equity work. And this is embedded into our law, because no matter who the mayor is or who's in city leadership, you will have this on the books to hold the administrations to come accountable for what they say and what they're supposed to do. Then the next question you'll see will be a true cost of living measure. So we all know New York City is hell of expensive. We know that. That's the one thing we all agree on as New Yorkers. However, though, we don't actually know what that cost is. We don't actually know how much does it take to live in New York City. I could do a quick poll now, if real quick. Someone just unmute and just say how much you think it costs to live in New York City in 2022. Like,
Like 5,000,
huh?
6,000,
How much?
5 to 3,000.
5 to 3,000? Okay.
Are we talking
Um,
salary wise or do you mean monthly?
A salary raise annually. Let me put it this way. Annually.
I would say 30 is the minimum to be able to do it comfortably, or at least even you'd even be uncomfortable at 30, but I would say 30.
Okay. Any other guesses?
I'll say 50 now.
50 now?
55.
Okay. 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 Not saying you can't live on 30, can't live on 50, but to live with real dignity, some and say you're in a household of say, you know, if you have like 2 kids, you need somewhere between, I don't know, 87 to $90,000 to live comfortably in New York City. And that means, you know, be able to afford housing, food, childcare, transportation, all these necessity costs without assistance. Meaning, like, you're not getting any, rent subsidy or, SNAP or whatever, but just able to take your salary and live comfortably in New York City. It can cost up to somewhere $90,000, some estimate. The federal poverty level, which is what we live under currently, only goes by 3 meals a day. And so the federal poverty measure is just $27,000. That to say you could feed you and 2 kids if you had children. And so we know that's totally out of whack, and that doesn't really give you a good sense of what it really costs to live here in New York City. So why we bring this up? What does this have to do with racial equity? Is your question. So when you're actually trying to measure what it costs to live with real dignity, then you can actually start to build policies and build programs to reflect, to help make sure New Yorkers are getting to that level of dignity. And then when you actually talk about real dignity, we're talking about real equity as well, racial equity. Because like I talk about in the first question, when you actually have a city that, people are living with real dignity, being able to live their best lives, have access opportunity, you can't do that if you're struggling, if you have to choose rent over food, if you can't put your children into, affordable childcare, if you have to hop the turnstile just to get to work, you're actually not living with real dignity. And a lot of times those policies that's preventing us from, living that life of dignity is rooted in structural racism. And so if we can measure it, then we can actually do something about addressing the problems we're facing. And so right now we don't actually have a real measurement from the city. And so if this was to pass, you get a true cost of living measurement every year. And so you can kind of measure up, okay, is my employer paying me, to live in the city with dignity? And, look, that doesn't mean that you can't make it on below that, but we as a city, if we're really serious about, making sure that we address the needs of all New Yorkers, you want to strive towards making sure that New Yorkers actually do live with that true cost of living number. So those are the 3 questions that you'll see. There's actually a 4th question. It's actually question 1. So these questions that I just went through are question 2, 3, and 4 on the ballot. So when you go on the ballot, you'll see question 2, 3, and 4. The first question is about an Environmental Bond Act question that that the state provided and not under the Racial Justice Commission, but definitely make your voice heard on that question as well. You don't want to leave anything blank when you go fill out the ballot. Even if you don't know much about it, you got technology now, Google it, read about it, and then you can vote. You can stand as long as you want. No one's going to rush you out the polling location. Take your time and read about each of these questions, read about the candidates, and you make the best decision you feel for yourself and your community. So that's what these ballot questions are. Right now I'm running part of a campaign that is to educate the public. And so one of the reasons I'm here today is to, deputize all of you to go out, help spread the word that there's an election around racial equity, ballot questions coming up, and tell people about these ballot questions, what encourage people to go on the website nyc.gov/racial justice and learn about it and make an informed decision when they go to the polls starting next week. But the more people we share this information with, the more people will be engaged and know what they're going out to vote for. The true outcome of how New York City feels around racial equity will come to surface. So that's why I'm here. You can always learn more. Like I said, go on our website, nyc.gov/racial justice, or you can email us at racialjustice@charter.nyc.gov. You can also follow us on Twitter at Racial Justice NY on Twitter. Follow us. Or you can follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Racial Justice NYC. I believe we got Snap and a couple other, I think we have TikTok. I don't have those platforms on my own phone, but I know we are starting to build those out ahead of the election to do some ads and to do some, just direct outreach to folks on those platforms as well. But you can always watch our commission videos. I recommend, if you got some time, if you want to learn how we got to these questions, how the process and everything, go on our YouTube channel and watch us, watch the different input sessions, the expert panels. They may be a bit long, but you can watch clips of it just to get a good flavor, like how the discussions went about. And I assure you'll learn quite a bit about like how we talk about racial equity in the city for the last 2 years. So I appreciate the time. Happy to answer questions. I'll stop sharing my screen. But thank you.
Let's give a round of applause for our presenters. Our presenter. All right.
Thank you, Harold, for sure. Any questions from our interns or anybody here? Anybody want to clarify anything? A lot of discussion in the chat once we talked about living in New York City, Harold. That was definitely a lot of commotion in the chat.
And there were some early messages I got as well too on the side. So definitely this is the time. Oh, Phantom, I see your hand up.
This is not a question, but I had texted Mr. Nigel about this. But I said I've never understood why people crave political power so much. If you are horrible to a multitude of communities, how do you let yourself live that down? Like, you're sitting pretty while everybody is suffering for what?
It's sometimes the same mentality why you have, doughboys and, those who, profit off of vices. It's power, money. There's some people who figure out how to use politics to enrich themselves. I'm not saying it's right, but that's what some people do. And you got to sift those folks out early and get them out early, because sometimes they're the ones who slow progress down, especially in our own communities. And I've seen it. I know in my phone, I got dozens and dozens of elected officials, and not all good. They're not all good people. And you just got to do what you can to sift those guys out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See, Denise has a hand up too, if you want to go next, Denise.
Yeah. So I'm someone who's very interested into true crime and about the justice system. So throughout my experience consuming true crime content, I realized how corrupt the NYPD as well as police departments have been throughout the years. And so like I remember during the BLM movement during COVID, they were talking about defunding the police, and this sort of talk about, oh, where would this money go to, or is it even possible, because the police have been so militarized throughout the years, like like we don't even realize it. Like for example, during the protests we saw like military people like SWAT teams and police officers being like all like decked out with like bulletproof vests and pistols and rubber bullets. But when the Trump supporters invaded the Capitol, there
Mhm.
were no police like personnel out there. So it's sort of like this double standard about like how do we have how do we feel safe knowing that, oh, like these police officers are doing their job and protecting their neighborhood without being over militarized or having too much money from the government.
Those are great, great statements you're making. I don't know if there was a question there specifically, but I could just like just give my thoughts overall. I mean, look, and it's interesting in this country, when you have darker skin, you are perceived to be a threat, right? So when you see a bunch of white folks protesting, I don't care if they had AK-40, like if I walk down the street with an AK-47, I'm not going to survive walking past a cop. But you have you have white people who literally walk openly with an AK-47, and they're fine because they're you know, whiteness seems safe in this country. It seems they're not a threat, even though, you know, to be honest with you, a lot of the biggest terrorist attacks on this country actually conducted by white people historically, but need that as it may. But that's what racism does, you know. Racism actually pollutes like logic, because those things are structured, racism is structured to hold power for a certain group of folks. And so that's why you have to start to consider what can we do as a city to break the structures of racism, because then you start to, you know, break that status quo where, you know, where whiteness or white supremacy, better put, is not as prevalent in our society. Because like the protest that you saw on January 6th, before they actually ran to the Capitol, they deemed that it wasn't that dangerous. It was just them blowing off steam because their guy lost and they're just mad and blah, blah, blah. But because, you know, media plays into it, is in our psyche that, you know, they should be fine. But when you have protests that's led by, you know, persons of color, you see triple the police officers, triple, because they're like, well, what if they do something? They're worried about you attacking property of theirs, attacking their institutions, their structures. Keyword is there, you know. They don't see it as ours. They don't see like it's theirs. And so we have to, the work that we have to do is break that, you know, where they feel like it's their country, their institutions, their way of life. If you hear racist white people talk, that's how they talk. They're there. We're the other. We're just kind of in the way. And so racial equity work is hard. I was just thinking about it before we got on the call, that to put it in perspective, my grandmother, who only died maybe about 13, 14 years ago, she had the she actually got to know her great grandmother, right? Just put it in perspective. There's a woman that raised me until I was 27 years old that actually knew a woman who was enslaved. So we're not that far removed from slavery. When people make it sound like it was a long time ago, it's not. It's really not. 150 or 60 years is really not a long time in the grand scheme of things. And so we're still dealing with, like, you know, the legacy of that, and the legacy of being as the other, and being as a threat, because we, you know, we interfere with their institutions, their structures, their way of life. So I don't know if that answered a question or you just gave me a reason just to like be on my bully pulpit for a little bit longer.
Yeah, no, it was really good. I also like to add that we know that New York is considered a blue state,
Mhm.
but in reality, it's the most racist and the most targeted place to like there's a lot of like terrorist groups in New York, and we don't even realize. We just see, oh, this is New York is a blue state, so that means it's safe. But it's like a little bit of both. Just the only reason why it's considered a blue state is because New York City as a whole, like the 5 boroughs by itself, has a lot of like very like democratic people. But if we remove that, it would become like a red state.
Oh yeah. You know, I don't know if anyone ever drove to Batavia, New York. Don't drive there at night. Don't drive. There's parts of upstate New York you would think you're in the South. And that just, you know, just a reality we live in. You know, I was driving back from a family vacation. I was followed by local, Long Island too. Yep, especially in Suffolk. I was followed by cops until I left the borders of their town. They literally, like, I zigged, they zagged with me until I hit the throughway. It's real. It's real. Yeah, we're considered a blue state, but like, don't let red and blue confuse what's racist and not anti-racist. Those two things are not the same. You know, just because just because it's blue don't mean, you know, it's an anti-racist state we're in. No, it's very racist. We're New York City. New York City is one of the most segregated cities in the country. What then will determine what kind of education you receive? There's something not right about that, you know? And that's why racial equity, you know, had to be discussed. So that's the conversation we're having, because here in New York City, you know, we're faced with like you know, real structural inequities that we need, you know, changes in order for us to move forward.
Agreed. Thank you so much. And honestly, I dropped in the chat earlier, and that comes back to the point. And I think that you were talking a lot about it earlier in regards to why these elected officials are so important, because they do voice the thoughts and the kind of the I guess passions of those that are within their district. So definitely thank you for just educating us in regards to some of those questions that are crucial for us to pay attention to as we as this upcoming election is upon us. And we definitely want to make sure that everyone within this group, whether you screenshotted that slide or not, or wrote down the website, we want to make sure that we'll share that back with you so that you can spread the word in regards to these diversity and equity questions that can definitely lead to changes in regards to some of the issues that you guys have all put on our radar. So we thank you. Harold, seeing that we're getting closer to 5, are there any lasting last words or thoughts that you want to leave with the group before we kind of just thank you for your time and make sure that we move forward with this information?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that if you're registered to vote, make sure you go out and vote this November. It actually starts October 29th, early vote. So flip it, don't miss it. Flip that ballot. The questions on the backside of it. So flip it, don't miss it. And if you're not of age to vote, go and encourage those who are to go out and vote, you know? And so I'll drop my email in the chat, as well as the website. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out. Feel free to, you know, come out and volunteer. You know, we can always, you know, I know you're all busy people, but if you got a few minutes to spare, come out and volunteer, hand out some palm cards, let folks know that, you know, racial equity questions are on the ballot this year. But I appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.